So this video will be coming out on a Tuesday, which is obviously, shall we say, the vote as the big vote, shall we say, on May's deals is happening, and it's very likely it's going to lose. I would be very, very surprised if it wins. It might scrape through by like a couple of votes, but I will be very, very surprised if the deal actually goes through. So, one of the things that we're talking about today is from the New Statesman, which is 7 rules for Remainers if they want to win a people's vote. So, we both want Britain to stay in the EU, but we see our side making a lot of communication errors. If another public vote isn't to end in another Leave victory, we think the following rules for communication are necessary. And I tend to agree with all of these. So, the first one is Rule 1, don't look back. Remainers seem to think that if they repeat the same arguments they made in 2016, only louder, things will go better next time. We are acting like the stereotypical Englishman abroad. If you find yourself making an argument that you could have made first time around, pause. Try and find new ways of talking about the choice that's in front of us. It is insanely counterproductive, for instance, to keep repeating that people were duped in 2016. All you're doing is reinforcing the impression that you don't respect the intelligence of the 52%. In fact, we'd advise against raking over the ashes of the last referendum altogether. It only serves to harden the divide. Focus instead on the choice in front of us. Should we accept Theresa May's deal, that is likely to only be the only Brexit option at any referendum? And is this good? News? And the good news is it's not popular. So number 2, drop the labels. I sort of agree with this one. We talk about Leavers and Remainers in this piece, but we don't recommend it when campaigning. The more you do that, the more you define people by the decisions they made 2 years ago. And the less you talk about what people actually want, the truth is that there is a lot of things that people on both sides that the vote agree on, perhaps more than you would imagine. 57% prioritise free trade over cutting immigration, for instance. So number 3 is tell Leavers they were right. And I sort of on this one. So as and when the last referendum does come up, don't talk about what those who voted to leave got wrong. Talk about what they got right. Voters were right to treat the promises of politicians with suspicion. Voters were right to shout about the lack of attention they got from Westminster, and the voters were justified in giving a political establishment a kick up the backside. Voters were right, given the choice on offer. We need to do much better. So number 4 is keep pointing out the botched Brexit. This is the biggest area of shared ground. 92% of people think that the Brexit process is a mess, no matter which way you voted. You should almost certainly think that it has been royally screwed up by the Westminster politicians. Let's take the ideological heart out of this debate by calling on British values and common sense, and fixing stuff like a builder coming into a house shaking his head about the last lot. Now it's up to us, the people, to clean this mess up. The campaign to Remain should include a call for urgent reform for British politics. It shouldn't just target Leave politicians, but the political class. This doesn't imply rancorous populism. It's about getting together and sorting out this mess. And I've talked about before that our political system is in need of some sort of reform. I've gone over that in the past. Paint Brexit as a distraction. First of all, let's be clear about this. May's deal isn't the end of Brexit. It's the start of the endless Brexit. Remainers are never going to persuade hardcore Leavers to change their minds about the EU. What they can do is focus on the common ground they share with wavering Leavers, that Brexit is a colossal, painful, decade-long waste of time and effort, and a distraction from our country's most urgent problems. We don't want our government to spend the next 10 years going to meetings in Brussels and Paris when they should be focusing on the problems of Sheffield and Coventry. We shouldn't be recruiting thousands of lawyers and trade negotiators when we desperately need more nurses and teachers. We don't want our politicians endlessly debating details of international treaties when they should be getting the homeless off the streets. What the referendum showed everyone was that many of the country's real problems aren't getting enough attention. So let's focus on these instead of Brexit. Oh. Hang on. Come on. Oh, hang on. Just had a little technical malfunction there. But this is something I've talked about before in many videos, that a lot of the reason that people voted to leave was because they were the hardest hit communities by austerity. And it was austerity that was put in by the government, not the EU. So it had been the government itself that had been, doing people hardest over universal credit. And for so many, especially the last 2 years, there have been so many stories coming out about how awful and bad universal credit is. So we should talk about that, definitely as a campaign. So I agree that doing that is a perfectly legitimate tactic. So 6, make this about taking back control. Another area of shared ground is, or should be, sovereignty. May's deal means Britain loses the power to set its own rules, precisely the opposite of what Leavers voted for. No deal would leave us enfeebled. Paradoxically, it's now Remainers who are in the best place to make the powerful appeal to desire for more control. And that is 100% true. It doesn't matter if we leave the European Union. They are our closest trading partner. They will be making rules that our companies in this nation will have to follow if they want to trade with the EU. So if the EU, for example, comes up with some regulation that really damages our industries, we've got no say in what happens in Europe because we're not part of the club. We're outside of it. So we can do nothing to affect anything like that, to the scale that we have at the moment. But so it is a really bizarre paradox that Remainers are in the best argument to now start saying we need to take back control and remain in the EU. So number 7, showcase converts. One of the most powerful strategies to counter terrorist de-radicalization is getting former terrorists to talk about why they decided to put violence aside. They carry credibility with those who are tempted to join the cause because they are one of us. In American politics, presidential campaigns run ads showing voters who came from the other party explaining why they can't vote for their party's candidate this time around. Remainers need to find Leavers who have changed their minds and showcase their stories. This isn't just a tactic, however. Any pro-EU campaign must let itself be infused by the voices of some of those who chose Leave last time around, and allow them to change its character. Crucially, you cannot afford to be painted as the people who want a return to the world pre-June 2016. Unless the upcoming referendum feels like a different debate to the last one, it will have the same result. If you want to remain, you cannot Remain. Which is exactly the point. Any upcoming referendum and people's vote needs to have a larger voice and a larger message. For example, one of the big things that we should do is say, okay, we're going to remain, but we're not going to push for reforms in the EU. It was never the EU that was the problem. It was the government that was the problem. So we need to pass reforms in Parliament that will completely change our system. So one of the things I've said would be term limits on MPs. So once you've been an MP for so long, you cannot stand for re-election, and then you cannot stand again for what, 20 years, 25 years? It would make sense. So this way, you are constantly getting new blood through the political system. This is one of the that I think this will make the biggest change there is, because all the current bigwigs of the party have been in place in Parliament for so long. They are now seen as, this establishment. But if you've got this new continuous flow of new people bringing in new ideas into Parliament all this time in this constant cycle, this will change politics. This will make people be able to trust people more. This will also mean that people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, who sits in a safe seat, and there are many Conservatives who sit in safe seats, same for Labour MPs as well, so don't think I'm leaving them out, but there are a lot of Conservative MPs who are like Jacob Rees-Mogg, who have no idea what it's... I mean, we talked about years before, if you want to have a look at something hilarious, go and have a look at what Jacob Rees-Mogg thinks about how we should fix the housing crisis. Because he thinks to fix the housing crisis, we've got to pull down structures like Grenfell. We've got to pull down tower blocks. But how is this going to fix the housing crisis? He gave the explanation that somehow, if you pull down tower blocks and you build terrace houses instead, and if you think you could only probably fit, if you think an average tower block might fit, 100 families, a row of terraced houses might only be able to fit 10 families in from that housing block. What about all those people who lived in that housing block that you just pulled down and now can't afford to live in those terrace houses because of housing prices? Again, there are larger problems in this scale that people like Jacob Rees-Mogg just don't understand. So it's hilarious, once again, when you see people who say, oh, we don't trust politicians, but for some reason really trust Jacob Rees-Mogg, even though he is the biggest establishment person out there. Same for Nigel Farage, massively establishment person. So those are 7 rules for the next referendum, which I certainly am going to take to heart. Let me know what you think to them, and do you think there should be more, or would you change some of them? Let me know what you think.